Hello, I'm Rick Anthony, and this is Caregiver Assist, a monthly series of, by, and for family caregivers, inspired by my own experience as a primary caregiver for my late wife. When my wife's illness became progressively worse, I stopped all other activities. It was an extremely important role for which I was not prepared. My journey was not unique. Millions of family caregivers in this country maintain 24/7 vigilance in anticipation of the unexpected. And like the others, I was constantly scolded by my family and friends to take care of myself so I could take care of my wife. I knew it was sound advice and well-intentioned. However, it was very difficult to put into practice, even though I had children and friends who were there and willing to spell me if I needed it. I've talked to other caregivers about this, and many have had the same difficulty taking time out for themselves. My guest today is Jane Hamilton, for whom this is an encore appearance on Caregiver Assist. Jane counsels with individuals, families, and employers on family caregivers' susceptibility to sickness in body, mind, and spirit. She calls it self-care. Jane has been a registered nurse for over 40 years and a caregiver for 20. She's the author of Caregiver's Guide to Self-Care. Jane, welcome back.
Thank you.
Good to see you
So
again.
glad to be here, Rick.
Well, you were so good the first time. We thought you'd
Bring her back, right?
Yeah, why not?
Why not?
Let's see if we can beat her up a little bit. As I said, you've been a registered nurse and a psychiatric nurse. Is that correct?
That was my specialty.
Yeah.
I went into psychiatric nursing because I had a real draw to how people feel inside.
Yeah.
And I practiced psychiatric nursing for a number of years.
In a hospital or?
In hospital setting and doing counseling, that sort of thing, yeah.
I don't know that I ever know any other psychiatric nurses.
Well, we're a different breed than the regular hospital nurse, and I have such respect for clinicians who handle all of the physical challenges of illness.
Yeah, but most of the psychologists and psychiatrists I know are really kooky.
Well, you don't know me that well, so you'll never know.
A quick story. When I graduated from college, I worked in a prison. I was a teacher.
Oh, really?
And one of my good friends was a clinical psychologist on G2. And he told me, and he had studied in Tibet and so on.
Wow.
He was really into it. He told me the reason he went into psychiatry, and he said most psychiatrists go into the profession to try to figure themselves out.
Well, on some level, I think people who are drawn to mental health have a basic grasp of the interior of life and how we're all struggling with internal challenges. Yeah. And like for me, I was drawn to be able to figure out how to understand those internal challenges I had and how to handle them.
Sounds kooky to me. Yeah. Jane, I don't want to over-dramatize this issue of self-care. However, caregiving has not been researched until quite recently, so we know more about the experience. But most physicians still don't understand it. They don't know how to deal with it, and they frankly aren't of much help. Why?
Well, I have given this a lot of thought, and I think the bottom line is the incentives in the healthcare system are not structured in such a way to draw clinicians to address caregivers' needs. Physicians are not paid by health insurance companies.
So there's no code for this?
No. And so it's over and above. And I have read that the vast majority of physicians at this point in time, this is 25, 35 years into the study of caregivers and caregivers' needs, the majority do know that caregivers have needs and would like to address them, but
there's no
they don't
financial
have
incentive.
And they don't have time. I mean, you think about how strained they are, but the good news that I heard from a 2023 study is that if a clinician has had experience as a caregiver, they're 4 times more likely to address those needs. So awareness is growing.
Even though there is not a code, they'll find some other way to cover it.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
they push it in there.
Well, what's the profile of the typical family, unpaid family caregiver?
Yes, well, the National Alliance for Caregiving and AARP do a study every 5 years called Caregiving in the U.S. And the 2020 study put out a profile that the typical caregiver is 49-year-old woman who has a job outside the home, who is caring for an elderly mother and does it for approximately 4.5 years and spends about 20 hours a week providing care. Now, that's one image, and that image sort of puts together the preponderance of the data. Of course, caregiving is a unique situation. So people from the very youngest people in our society to people who are still in the silent generation are providing care.
I suspect that profile is a kind of a holdover from even the 50s and 60s, when women, for the most part, married women, were home. They were the home taker.
Yeah, and caregivers, they're changing. And at this point in time, it's like a 60-40 split, male-female. And what they say is that the women do more of the hands-on kind of caregiving than their male counterparts. But men are in there, as you well know.
How is the stress that family caregivers have manifested in their behavior?
Well, the image that comes to my mind and that I use in my presentations and in my book is the image of a 6-pointed star. And there are, in terms of a holistic view of us as human beings, we as whole people are made up of 6 interrelated and interdependent parts. And if we change one part of ourselves, it has an impact on the whole. And so those 6 points of the star are my physical self, my intellectual self, that's my cognitive thought process, my emotional self, my feelings, physical, intellectual, mental, social, my interpersonal or my play part, my occupational self. I have work. Whether or not I'm retired, I've got housework to do and I have to pay the bills. So there's an occupational part to me, and there's finally a spiritual part to me. And when I look at stress in caregivers, those the sources of stress can come in any of those 6 parts, but the symptoms of stress can show up in any of those 6 parts as well. And each of us, being unique people, will have our own unique constellation of symptoms, and we need to think about those parts. And in my book, I created a handy little checklist to help people sort of do an inventory of those 6 parts, and that's where we look for our symptoms of stress. And what I tell people is that the symptoms of stress are like a clanging bell. They're warning signals that our bodies and our minds and our souls are sending to us that say, do something, take care of yourself. And we oftentimes overlook those. We say, it doesn't matter. I can keep going.
Therefore, does the illness, a broad term, that may overcome a stressed caregiver, imperceptible? Does it kind of sneak up on people?
Well, I think there are early warning signals. Some of us are more aware than others, and the more conscious we are of our body and our feelings and our relationships, that helps us. So when I start to, my husband, when I used to get stressed out when my mom was not well, I would get a little snappy. He said, "You're getting a little brittle." You know, okay, I see that. I see that. And so sometimes, you know, we overlook it, but the people in our lives can see it, and so with their help, we might respond.
So how do you define, I mean, you've written the book, Self-Care, A Guide to Self-Care. How do you define self-care?
Oh, okay, self-care. When I think about self-care, it is putting myself on the to-do list. It's an awareness or an attitude that I am worthy of care. I don't have to just give care. So it's an awareness. It's an action. It's putting myself to bed so that I can take a rest. It's eating good food. It's going out for a walk. It's talking with my friend when I'm upset. These are actions. So self-care is an action. It's an attitude. It's recognizing that self-care is not selfish. It is, self-care is a health promotion strategy. It is anything I do to refill my energy and nurture myself. And by virtue of that fact, self-care is a uniquely personal thing. What will give you relief from stress may not work for me. You might like to go out and jog, but I've had knee surgery, for example. I haven't had knee surgery, but I've had knee surgery. Going out to jog would not be good stress management for me and self-care. So it's something that we each need to define personally and something that we need to make a commitment to.
So if it's so important, why do most of us, I think most, at least the people I've talked to, find it so difficult to engage in consistent, purposeful self-care?
Well, I think that there are, in my image, there are 4 reasons why it's hard. The first reason is just the pace of 21st century life. We have the internet and we have cell phones and we're on 24/7. We don't turn off in the same way that we did in days gone by. So things are flying at us 24/7, and it's hard to put a boundary. Beyond the pace of life, I think the second thing is the set of traditional roles that we have. I'm her daughter, of course I'm going to help her. I'm her husband, of course I'm going to do this. I'm a good Christian person. I am going to be there no matter what. And so we have roles in our families, we have roles from our religious backgrounds, we have sex roles. A good woman would do this. And these roles create expectations that we try to live up to, and sometimes we don't recognize how those expectations are setting us up for problems. The third reason that I think it's difficult, picture the Titanic sailing towards the iceberg. They did not see on the deck that iceberg. They didn't recognize. And I think as we sail along in our lives, we don't see the cost of over-functioning. We feel like we have this great capacity. Oh, I can do it. We see our needs and compare them to the person who's lying in the bed ill. And we say, compared to him, I can do anything. So yeah, I'm going to keep going. And I sail right into that iceberg because I don't see it. And I think the fourth thing, this is the idea that we diminish the importance of small acts of self-care. I look at self-care, this is the image I want you to think of, like brushing your teeth. We all, in modern world, understand dental care. You brush your teeth every day. You use a good toothpaste. You floss. You go to the. You have teeth until you're 80 or 90. Well, if you don't do those little things, if you are living in prehistoric times, you don't have teeth till you're 90. You don't live till you're 90. So the idea that small things really make a difference. So taking a 10-minute lie down in the afternoon is important, or passing up on that extra drink and saying, no, I'm not going to do that. That's not healthy. Saying, I'm going to go out for a walk because that will allow me to let go. Those little things make a difference. And those are the 4 reasons why we don't.
I'm a little surprised because I was expecting something else.
What were you expecting?
Those aren't relevant.
Oh, thank you.
Guilt, anger, resentment, frustration, all of which drain you emotionally.
Well, I think that the guilt piece of it is tied to those traditional roles. I'm
Yes, I see.
her daughter.
Yeah.
I have to do this. I can't not do it. And I think it comes from that.
In the book, you stress the importance of resilience. Now, I'm not sure in the book you do define it, but define resilience. Because I agree with you. I think it's very important to be able to bounce back, get up the next day, even if the day before was a horror, get up the next day and say, I'm going to be able to handle this thing.
Exactly. And resilience, I came to as I was going through being a caregiver myself. I was slogging along for 8 years. My parents were ill, both of them with serious issues. And I came across this concept that people in positive psychology have written about. And resilience is something you can think about an elbow straw that bends,
Yes.
or you can think about a rubber ball that bounces, or a slinky toy that keeps moving. And resilience is the ability to bounce back, to adjust, to adapt, to cope with adversity that comes to us and not be laid low from it. Resilience is tapping into my inner capacity to cope with the adversity that life throws me and find a way to prevail. I think about Nelson Mandela, who lived for so many years in so many difficult situations and ultimately triumphed. And we are given a choice. And I think resilience is choosing that I am going to face adversity and be a victor and not the victim.
But if a caregiver, going back to the statistics, 4 years, 5 years, day in, day out routine.
Right.
A loved one is getting worse.
Right.
In spite of everything you have tried to do, the doctors have tried to do.
And you know the outcome.
The outcome is inevitable. It seems to me it's awfully difficult to sustain a sufficient level of resilience.
Yes.
To keep your equilibrium.
Yes. And to continue on.
Yeah.
How do you keep going? I remember having a conversation with my father, who had 2 lobes of his lungs removed. He had COPD. He was legally blind, and he just sort of carried on with his life. He was that. And I said to him one day, Rick, and his wife had dementia, who was my mother. How do you carry on? How do you go on?
Yeah.
And he stopped a moment and he said, well, you play the hand you're dealt.
Yeah.
And I am so grateful to him for that. And it has helped me over the years to recognize that we don't choose what life deals us, but we do choose how we respond. Yeah. And so resilience is not easy. And those little self-care practices that we use help us to get there, but there are other things we can do to build resilience.
I understand. I have a friend who lost his wife as well, 2 months before I lost mine. She was very ill for longer than my wife was ill.
Right.
I mean, very ill.
Yeah.
And she had a propensity over time to fall all the time. This meant she was in the hospital all the time and so on. It's not an uncommon story, as you know. But it's his personality.
Right.
Paul, he's had difficulties in his business, but he's always been able to put on a good show and be energetic and interested in you and hold a conversation. He was authentic in many, many ways. But it was his personality. Now, I know he was hurting inside. Behind that facade, he was hurting as much as I and others do. But if that's resilience, it was in his case, he'd always been like that. He had a propensity to handle things like that, always with a smile, always with, it can't be that bad, I can fix it. It may take time, but I'll fix it.
Well, you don't want to be Pollyanna, pretending.
No, he's
because
not pretending.
Pollyanna is not resilience.
Yeah.
I read this great book by two physicians, Southwick and Charney, and they wrote about resilience. And in their work, they interviewed POWs and people who were with the special forces. And I mean, these are people who had resilience and lived through some horrific experiences. And they identified the characteristics of people who have resilience and suggest that we can cultivate that if we cultivate those things. And there's some of the things I write about in the book. But one of the most important qualities of a resilient person that they say we need to cultivate is optimism.
Yeah.
And optimism, not Pollyanna, everything's going to be fine, but optimism, they said, which is grounded in a hopefulness that we can get through this.
Optimism has to be nurtured.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what you're saying.
Yes.
Last week, I interviewed a woman out in the West Coast. She is a wife, mother, has a full-time job. Her mother has Parkinson's disease, and her father has the worst kind of dementia. It's a prefrontal something. And he lives in an institution. She's 2,500 miles away from them. She's doing the best she can. She gets to see them as often as she can. She had to go into therapy to deal with the stress. It just got to her. She had a sibling, but the sibling was of no help. And she told me openly, she said, my husband, my family, I wasn't doing a very good job with them, and I wasn't doing a very good job of taking care of my parents either, even though it had to be remote. But the best part of her story was it had not a happy ending in terms of her parents, but a happy ending in terms of her ability to be self-aware and to do what was necessary to take care of herself so she could take care of her parents. It's a good story, I think.
That's a great story.
But it's the distance. It's the added difficulty people who are doing it remotely have. Because in a way they have delayed gratification. They may do some things and not know if it's making a difference at all because they're over there and they can't rely on the people who are reporting back. Anyway.
There's a whole group of writings about people like that. They're called long-distance caregivers. Yeah. And I was a long-distance caregiver for my parents.
Oh, you were?
Yeah. But, the story that you present is that the long-distance caregiver has this certain set of stressors, causes of their stress. They're different, but there are stressors for the person who is there 24/7 too.
Sure.
So whether I'm far away or nearby, caregiving wears on my well-being, and it's important for me to care for myself. And when we get beyond a balance point, when the stressors undermine my ability to function, when they become so prominent that I can't, I don't have a sense of balance. I remember I got to a point myself where I needed to see somebody for counseling, and I needed to take medication. And I'm a psychiatric nurse, so I mean, you would think I would say, oh, that would be fine, but I felt like, oh, I was failing, or I was not strong enough. And my dear friend, who is a psychiatric social worker, said, no, Jane, what's happening is that your life has been strained to the point where you need some assistance. And guess what? You're human. You need assistance sometimes. And she encouraged me to take an antidepressant, to see somebody for counseling, to get some medication. I did. And you know, Rick, what was so interesting is that what she said to me was exactly true. It created almost a floor for my emotions, so I wasn't sinking down into the pit, but the floor caught me, and I was able, on that medication floor, to be able to regain my energy and to carry on. And so, you know, I think it's important for us when we're struggling as mightily as we do to give ourselves permission to seek out professional help.
I've always had an aversion to any kind of medication. This is absolutely, I'm sure you're the same way.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
But I had the same experience. I'm on an antidepressant. And I hate it. But that's an interesting way you put it. I do have a sense that there is a floor.
And that I'm not sinking down.
I'm being supported, yes.
Right.
And I know it's chemical. This thing I'm taking is working on my brain as it's supposed to. And I don't know how long I'll be on it.
Well, and probably you won't have to be on it forever and ever.
Well, you know,
I will speak for myself. I wasn't on it forever and ever.
You know, we could talk about, this is going to another subject.
Yeah, different subject.
Grieving. And how long that goes and so on. At any rate, but that's a very important part that men, I think, particularly, are so macho. I don't need that. I can handle it.
Well, I'm a little macho myself sometimes.
I caved. I needed something because I was crying all the time.
Well, that's what actually led me.
Even when I was a caregiver, I was crying.
Yeah. A Tuesday afternoon, I called my friend up and I was sobbing, and I said, there's something the matter with this, and I need to do something about it. And, you know, when you talk about the medication being a chemical, the fact of the matter is our emotions are setting off chemical reactions in our brain. And so that's just a part of how we operate.
Well, as I said, there's a lot of research, so at least I've been doing a lot of reading, and a lot more than there was before. And there probably, this is my sense, I think there are 3 national organizations for caregivers now, at least 3.
Oh, there are a lot of them,
and there may be too many. As often happens, these nonprofits pop up all over the place. Maybe it's time for consolidation. So instead of everybody having their hand out, they put all the money together and finally get something done. And anyway, that's a pet peeve of mine. What advice do you give to caregivers who are considering, we've already covered this, antidepressants and counseling? I haven't done the counseling yet. Friends of mine have, and maybe I need it, but I haven't had it yet. And if I need it, I'll get it.
Well, you know, what I would say is to talk to your primary care physician or to a counselor who you're already connected with and get professional advice. That's what I would say to somebody. And in terms of, you know, where you're at, we look at caregiving as a journey, and it has different stages. And when we come to the ending of caregiving, there's the task of letting go of those practices and moving on. And a part of letting go, you know this, is bereavement.
I'm gonna have to invite you back again because we're running out of time. My guest today has been Jane Hamilton, who is an author, counselor, and a good friend. Until next time, this has been Caregiver Assist. I'm Rick Anthony. Take very good care of yourselves